God bless America. Hello, everybody. I am the Talk Radio Protege, and this is the Protege program. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you enjoy this video. So, the New York Times, I heard today that they wrote a claim that more Americans have died from guns in the United States since 1968 than on all the battlefields of all the wars in American history. And I was thinking that this was written closer to today, but it turns out it was written in 2015. And Pundit Fact decided they're going to fact check this. So, what did they determine? Well, it turns out that they just did an up and down raw numbers comparison, and they found that the total number of Americans that died in wars was 1.4 million, 1.396 million, and the total number of Americans that died in gun violence was 1.5 million. So they said, where did it go? Straight up and down, we rate the claim true. And they did offer a little bit of context, or as the Young Turks like to say, nuance. And I want to investigate that nuance a little bit, because I think it's disingenuous to just say, yes, this is true. Especially considering that when the New York Times, a far-left political activism center, says more Americans have died in gun violence domestically than in wars that the United States has fought in, they're trying to make you think homicide. You're supposed to read that sentence and think homicide. You're not supposed to wonder how many people committed suicide with a gun since that time period. You're just supposed to think suicide. So I've done the work that PolitiFact decided not to do. I've done some math for you, and we're going to go through and figure out exactly what the proportion of, or how many lives could be potentially saved by eliminating guns from the equation. So let's just throw the two totals up there, the first two totals that are given to us by Pundit Fact. U.S. deaths in U.S. wars and since the beginning of the United States, and gun-related deaths since from 1968 until 2015. Now, you take out suicides because, you know, if a person is willing to blow their own face off, you're not going to save that person simply by taking the gun out of the equation. They need a little something more. They need a little bit of additional help to not kill themselves. You know, they could overdose on medication. They could throw themselves off of a bridge or a cliff or a building. They could hang themselves in some way. They need a little bit more help than just taking a gun away from them. So you can't count the suicide deaths in the total. You also can't count the accidental deaths. These are not malicious actions that you can blame on the gun. That you can blame on the people, rather. These are not homicides. You take those out of the equation. You also take out legal intervention from the equation, because this is actually saving people's lives. This is the opposite of homicide. And this could be police using lethal force with a firearm to save someone. This could be individuals using lethal force with a firearm to save someone. So you take all of that out, and you get 500,000 deaths. That's about a third of the original total. And when you compare the two, it's 72 to 18% total firearm-related deaths between war and homicide. But there's also a few more deaths that you can take out of this total, and that's gang-related deaths. Now, I'm getting my numbers from a study that the CDC did on gang homicides. They studied 5 cities that had a high gang prevalence, and they found that roughly 30%, roughly a third, of the homicides committed in these cities over the course of the study, they found that 90% of the homicide incidents involved firearms. So, you know, 30% in a high gang activity area, that's probably not all across the fruited plain. That's just in those few cities. So maybe 15% of the actual homicide numbers were from gangs, but let's be really generous and say 7.5% of homicides are gang-related. And then only 90% of those used firearms, so that's 6.75% of the gun homicide total. That's another 100,000 deaths that you take off the charts. It gets us down to 428,000 deaths, 77 to 13% of the deaths. And you could eliminate a few more deaths from this total, but it's speculation. You could say there's certain people that are going to kill no matter what kind of weapon it takes. There's certain people that are just that evil. You take their guns away and they're going to find another way to kill people. But even if we just said, I think that this is the most generous that we can be with this number. Eliminating guns from the United States of America completely would, quote-unquote, save 428,516 lives from 1968 until 2015. But that doesn't take into account the number of times that firearms are used in a non-lethal manner that saves a person's life. But people have actually compiled those numbers. Gun Owners of America says that it's 2.5 million times a year in self-defense. Now, obviously, they haven't killed 2.5 million people, or that previous number, the 1.5 million gun deaths in the United States of America would be much higher. We also know for a fact, because we've seen the numbers for suicide, gang violence, accidents, that it's not even just 1 million times a year that it's used non-lethally in self-defense. If you assume that 500,000 times a firearm is used in self-defense, just assume that all of those homicides, all 500,000 that we worked the number down to, are all self-defense. That means at least that means at most 2 million times firearms are used to save lives in a way that doesn't result in death whatsoever. The least amount, you could say, we could get from the Clinton Justice Department. That's Bill Clinton, not Hillary Clinton. 1.5 million times annually for self-defense. You could say 1 million, at the very, very, very least, firearms are used 1 million times non-lethally every year. Not just from 1968 till 2015. Every year. So that means we need to do some more math. Quick, what's 1968 to 2015? How many years is that? 47 times 1 million. 47 million lives saved by non-lethal firearm use in the United States of America. 47 million at the minimum from 1968 to 2015. Eliminating guns from that picture at the most saves 1.5 million lives. We're not even in the same ballpark. We're not even freaking close. We're not even in the same league. We're talking about D-League farm team baseball pretenders in the Eliminate Guns from the United States of America camp. And we're talking about the New York Yankees best baseball in the world level by keeping guns in the United States of America in the hands of law-abiding citizens. It's not even close. Not even close. And it's probably because of realizations similar to this, that left-wing writers, that's the wrong button, like this individual who used to write for 538, left-wing data analysis company, said, "I used to think gun control was the answer. My research told me otherwise." This is statistical analysis from Leah Labrisco, former news writer at 538. "Before I started researching gun deaths, gun control policy used to frustrate me. I wish the NRA would stop blocking common sense gun reform." Then my colleagues and I at 538 spend 3 months analyzing all 33,000 lives ended by guns each year in the United States. I researched the strictly tightened gun laws in Britain and Australia and concluded that they didn't prove much about what America's policy should be. Neither nation experienced drops in mass shootings or other gun-related crime that could be attributed to their buybacks and bans. Mass shootings were too rare in Australia for their absence after the buyback program to be clear evidence of progress. This is from a statistician. This is not from some hayseed backwards hick that's one of the bitter clingers that Obama slammed when he was campaigning for president. This is from a statistician that crunches numbers for a freaking living. Whenever I looked at other off-praised policies, I found that no gun owner walks into the store to buy an assault weapon. It's an invented classification that includes any semi-automatic that has 2 or more features, such as a bayonet mount or RPG launcher mount, a folding stock, or pistol grip. No gun owner walks into a store to buy an assault weapon. Law-abiding citizens that purchase firearms don't buy assault weapons. They purchase self-defense weapons. They purchase hunting weapons. They don't purchase these quote-unquote assault weapons that Bill Clinton invented. Guns are modular, and any hobbyist can easily add these features at home just as if they are snapping together Legos. As for silencers, they deserve that name only in movies, for they reduce gunfire to a soft poof, poof. You know, that's the way I like to describe it. In real life, silencers limit hearing damage for shooters but don't make gunfire dangerously quiet. I just uploaded a video at lunchtime today talking about this. An AR-15 with a silencer is about as loud as a jackhammer. Magazine limits were a little more promising, but a practiced shooter could still change magazines so fast as to make the limit meaningless. There are videos on YouTube where they actually show you that even shooting amateurs can reload small capacity firearms at a relatively fast pace. That even trained police officers would have trouble disarming. As my coworkers and I kept looking at the data, it seemed less and less clear that one broad gun control restriction could make the difference. 2/3 of gun deaths every year are suicides. This is what Pundit Fact stated in their article, and this statistician just reinforced that for us. Our mathematical analysis that we did earlier that eliminated suicides from that 1.5 million total was valid. Almost no proposed restriction would make it meaningfully harder for people with guns on hand to use them. I could not even answer my most desperate question. If I had a friend who had guns in his home and a history of suicide attempts, was there anything I could do that would help? The next largest set of gun deaths, 1 in 5, were young men aged 15 to 34 killed in homicides. These men were most likely to die at the hands of other young men, often related to gang loyalties or other street violence. Remember, we said this number was as big as 30%. That's about 1 in 6. That's about 1 in 6. 30%, that's 1 in 3. That's higher. So when I said 1 in 5, I was getting a lot closer. That was about 1 in 6. And that was just by guessing. That was taking a study that took gang violence from the cities with the most gang activity and saying it's probably not that from the whole country, let's cut it in half, and then let's be extra generous and cut it in half again. So the cutting it in half and saying 15% is probably right was pretty close. That's 1 in 6 compared to 1 in 5. And the last notable group of similar deaths was the 1,700 women murdered per year, usually the result of domestic violence. Far more people were killed in these ways than in mass shooting incidents, but few of the popularly floated policies were tailored to serve them. By the time we published our project, I didn't believe in many of the interventions I'd heard politicians tout. I was still an anti-gun, at least from the point of view of most gun owners, and I don't want a gun in my home, as I think the risk outweighs the benefits, but I can't endorse politics whose only selling point is that gun owners hate them. Policies that often seem as if they were drafted by people who have encountered guns only as a figure in a briefing book or an image in the news. And what is the criticism that I leveled at Jimmy Kimmel in two different videos in the last 24 hours? Is that he's never owned a gun, he doesn't own a gun, and he's probably never fired a gun, and most likely will never ever have to fire a gun. And he wants to make it harder for the average American to get a gun. Not as the kind of people that we've talked about here, the suicidal types, the gang members, or the domestic abusers. He's talking about average Americans. Instead, I found the most hope in more narrowly tailored interventions. Potential suicide victims, women menaced by their abusive partners, and kids swept up in street vendettas are all in danger for guns, but they each require different protections. A sweeping gun ban that targets the average American does not target suicidal individuals, abusive domestic abusers, or kids swept up in street violence. Older men, who make up the largest share of gun suicides, need better access to people who could care for them and get them help. Women endangered by specific men need to be prioritized by the police. They also don't need to be subjected to 3-day waiting periods on buying firearms. You've probably heard that a firearm is called the Great Equalizer. That's because a woman with a firearm is just as powerful as a man with a firearm. A woman who is in danger of being abused by her domestic partner, it becomes instantaneously, infinitely more powerful with him with a gun in her hands than he does, providing she's willing to use it if he threatens to assault her. And I don't mean just verbally threatens, I mean comes at her with the intent of assaulting. Younger men at risk of violence need to be identified before they take a life or lose theirs, and to be connected to mentors who can help them de-escalate conflicts. She says they need to be connected to mentors. What's the number one mentor that kids that aren't swept up in gun violence is? I've heard the statistic cited on occasion, and I don't recall it, but I'm pretty sure it's the majority of men that are involved in gang violence or have been arrested and put in jail for violent offenses came from a fatherless home. They came from a home with no mentor, and they need one. They either need a community mentor that's going to teach them how to be the bigger man, or they need a father who's going to tell them how to prioritize productive, upstanding lifestyles. Even the most data-driven practices, such as New Orleans' plan to identify gang members for intervention based on previous arrests and weapon seizures, wind up more personal than most policies floated. The young men at risk can be identified by an algorithm, but they have to be disarmed one by one personally, not en masse, as though they were all interchangeable. Again, a policy that targets big, massive swaths of Americans, particularly law-abiding ones, does not target the most at-risk individuals. I must be talking wrong because I'm feeling my throat kind of seize up on me, and I think I've covered this story sufficiently. I've spent about 10 minutes on it. Let me show you the link in the title of the story. This is from Washington Post. I used to think gun control was the answer. My research told me otherwise. From Leah Labrisco, if you want to look it up and finish reading. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you'll come back and join me in my next video. I'm uploading videos every weekday around 6 o'clock in the evening. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, maybe even subscribe, and come back for more. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Good night, and God bless.